Aliens have landed on Earth and integrated into society, which of course the human beings are taking very well. It's a buddy cop story starring James Caan as he's partnered with the first ever extraterrestrial detective. This is Alien Nation. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is George.
I come in peace.
It's related to the movie. The reference makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, but he's actually David, just for future reference, though, in case it comes up and maybe you get confused
I was going to say, I think this is one of those things. I think Stan Lee once said, every comic is somebody's first. I think that applies to podcasts as well.
Yes. So there's just going to be like, half a dozen people who just think your name is George for the rest of the time.
They'd be like, hey, can we get that George guy back? He had some really good opinions.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and talk about a movie we watched that's really quite that simple. And for this episode, we are doing Alien Nation, which won a Patreon vote between a few other films for possible gems from the 1980s. This was the one that was the victor, stars James Caan, and it's a simple premise that actually led to a TV show just a year after the movie existed. But it's basically aliens arrived on Earth in the near future of 1991. And 3 years later, so the movie's set in 1994, they've integrated into society, they've got jobs, they've got houses, apartments, and the main focus of the movie is that our bigoted cop, played by James Caan, is partnered up with the first ever alien detective, and they must solve a case that is relevant to the alien community, and that is your basic gist. And if you're thinking to yourself, this sounds somewhat familiar, basically that movie called Bright that came out a few years ago was basically doing the same premise, but with like fantasy creatures instead of aliens. But it's the same idea.
It's Bright, but instead of fantasy, it's set in District 9's universe.
There's a little District 9, and at least in just raw concept.
By the way, just want to correct one thing.
What?
You got the timeline. It was 88 and then 3 years forward to 91.
Oh, I don't think so. At the start in the news, they said 1991, the aliens arrived, and then it's kept ahead 3 years.
I'm going based off the Wikipedia article.
I think the Wikipedia is wrong.
Infallible. All right, fair enough.
Because the movie at the start says 1991, the aliens arrived. That's what it says at the start.
Los Angeles. Well, it says the city of Los Angeles in 1991, they have landed, and now they are among us. So that could implicate the fact of, like, they've already integrated with that last line.
David, I'm not paying attention to the Wikipedia. I'm going by what happened at the start of the movie.
I'm just saying, I'm reading the same things you are in terms of the movie. I'm coming to different conclusions. Mind you, it doesn't matter. It's set in the near future.
No, it doesn't matter, which is why it's annoying that you're even focusing on it this much.
I was trying to correct so that we don't get any nasty comments of saying, well, actually.
Look. The way it presented it to me, I thought it was clearly 94 when the rest of the movie took place. If that's incorrect, then the movie did a poor job of telling me that.
That's fair. That's fine. George agrees with you. David does not.
But yeah, anyway, so that's the basic gist of the movie. We'll start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you warning before we get to spoilers. Of course, you can get some bonus content over in Patreon or YouTube membership, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. So yeah, I mean, I had seen this before. I actually saw this about... I think it was right around the time Bright was coming out, because I remember joking about how it was basically the same premise, which, is more of a mocking of Bright than this, because Bright was much, much later. But, yeah. So, were you familiar with this in any way? Did you heard of it?
I feel like I've heard of it to some extent, but I've definitely never seen it. That being said, when I went looking for it, I did have to specifically put in 1988 instead of all the TV movies and TV shows and all that stuff that came after, which immediately led me down the rabbit hole of, dear God, this property got so many spin-offs and like expansions on the lore that they set up.
You can see why it became a TV show. You can see why this, like, because ultimately, in terms of like alien design, it's just a bit of makeup, and there's tons of TV shows like Star Trek that have aliens like this in their shows. So I could easily see a cop show with it's, it's a human and an alien solving crimes. That's your basic premise. Off you go.
Yeah, if they thought that RoboCop was like enough to not only be a live action show, but also an animated one, I absolutely believe that whatever amount of cocaine they were doing in the late 80s, they were like, yep, this is going to sell like crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, the premise is solid. Absolutely. You've got a great actor in the lead role.
Yes.
You've even got Terence Stamp, who's going to be the villain. Of course, also an alien villain in another film you might have heard of called Superman. He played General Zod.
I'll take your word for it. Okay.
Okay. We also have a couple other like sort of faces that you might recognize. I mean, the other lead of the movie is the main alien, of course, Sam Francisco, although Caan's character just calls him George, which is where the joke at the start came from.
Yes.
But I recognize the face now that I'm looking at him on IMDb, but obviously in the movie I didn't recognize his face because he's in makeup, so, you know, tough to tell. The only other face that I really recognized throughout the entire movie was, at one point they go to question one of the aliens, and it's an actor that I have seen in numerous types of demon and alien makeup, and that is Brian Thompson, who has been on multiple episodes of Star Trek, multiple episodes of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He was in The Terminator. He was in Cobra, I believe, with Stallone. Like, This guy is, like, he's got such a memorable jawline. He's also the villain in the second Mortal Kombat movie, actually, which is also another place people might know him from. But he's one of those actors that has popped up in so many small roles, especially roles where he's wearing, like, alien or demon makeup of some kind, that I just, you know, I clapped. I saw him and I was like, yeah, this Brian Thompson, he's always here for these things.
I'll give you full marks on that, because I didn't notice anybody once they were in the alien makeup. They were absolutely blending in together for me.
I mean, most of them absolutely were. He just has a very specific sort of mouth and jawline. I can spot it. I can spot it a mile off. So, yeah, there he is.
That being said, I don't think you ever actually said the name of the actor who plays San Francisco.
Oh, I did actually, yeah.
It's Mandy Patinkin, who most people I think are going to know as Inigo Montoya from Princess Bride, and I completely missed him. Like, I got 3/4 of the way through this movie before I'm like, you know, who's playing that guy? I'm curious. And then I'm like, oh, you got me. I never would have guessed that that's Inigo Montoya.
Yeah, I've seen that movie once, so I was not going to recognize him from that.
That's fine.
You know, even if I'd seen his face fully, I wouldn't have recognized him from that. I just know his face generally because he's in like a TV show that's been promoted a bunch, and that's kind of it. I don't really know. I don't know if I've seen anything else that he's in other than Princess Bride that one time. He's got like hundreds of credits, though. I'm not looking through them.
Oh yeah, no, he's very prolific. I'm not sure where his like apex of his career was, but I'd imagine back in this late 80s, early 90s period.
I don't know, like, because he's on Homeland, and maybe like he's found a good TV career in his later life. I don't know when you'd argue he was at his most successful. I bet he's getting paid more now than he was.
Oh, absolutely paid more. Yeah, I was more so talking about like public awareness of him as an actor.
Yeah, I don't know. I generally don't know, but yeah, we'll get into it. I'll ask David the question I always start with, the simple and to the point. David, how did you feel about Alien Nation?
I liked it. I went into this, I was, you know, I knew it was a buddy cop film, and based off of what the initial premise gave me, it was this idea of very, very clear racist, like, parallels and such like that. I think that they do a good job of handling it. It doesn't feel like it's too, like, laying it on too thick. It doesn't feel like it's trying to go for this moralistic message and it's just beating us over the head with it. But at the same time, it does feel like it's handling it with some class and tact, where it is saying something actually pretty interesting here. And then in terms of just the way that the chemistry of the two main actors works out, just chef's kiss. It's such a good chemistry between the two of them. And I think that James Caan is absolutely fantastic here. Like, there's so many little things to his character that I just came to love from beginning to end, that ultimately I think that this may be one of my favorite, like, when I say buddy cop roles, I mean specifically his half of it, of the guy who doesn't play by the rules and whatnot. I think he does that extremely well, because a lot of times I think that role goes a bit too far into the, well, now you're just a vigilante aspect, whereas he still feels like a cop the whole way through. So I appreciate it. I think it's a very well-made movie. Practical effects are fantastic. The way it introduces the newcomers, which is what the aliens are called, again, does a great job of just setting the scene for that. It's overall, I can see why it got so much in terms of spin-offs, because there is a lot to this movie that feels like they actually thought through how this would have worked, and they kept it going, and they kept it, obviously realistic's a very loaded word here, but they kept it something where I was never pulled out of it.
Yeah, yeah, you're a bit more like enthusiastically positive than I think I am. I think it's okay overall.
Okay.
I agree with the chemistry between the two leads. It's the best thing in the movie. I do think that the premise is fairly well thought out. I do think some of it is a bit on the nose in terms of its symbolism.
Yeah.
Also, I loved how you phrased that. There's racist parallels, which makes it sound like the parallels are racist.
I mean, they are, but yeah.
As opposed to those, parallels where it's talking about racism. But yeah, I think some of that's a little bit on the nose, but generally speaking, obviously it's all coming from a good place, and it's trying to actually say things with what it's doing. Or even beyond racism, I would say specifically immigration, I think is the thing that it's really hitting at. This idea of like being xenophobic and all that sort of stuff. Where I think,
I mean, even, sorry, just interrupt. Even in the poster, they say they live among us. They've learned the language. They've taken our jobs and have tried to fit in. Like, it's very clearly going with an immigration parallel there.
Where I think it falls down though is how the plot actually plays out, and like the pacing and the kind of the actual payoff to things that are going on. I think their actual investigation into the crimes they're looking at is painfully dull and just feels like a bunch of convoluted like names. There's definitely a point like early in this movie, maybe about half an hour in, where it's like, okay, they're talking to the son of this character, but then they're talking to this like associate of someone else, and then they're investigating this murder that wasn't even someone we saw on screen, but it's the case is related to the main case that we're following on screen. And there's all this like going to talk to various people, and at a certain point I'm like, okay, I need like a diagram of like how all these people are connected, because they're just throwing names around so constantly that I don't think it flows very well and is not that engaging to watch. The bits that are engaging are the little interactions between the main pair as they're doing all this, but the actual case is not that interesting. And the movie is like barely hitting 90 minutes, and I think that I feel that in the pacing, especially where they introduce like who's clearly the main villain, right? The main big bad of the movie. And they get one scene where he's like acting all nice for the public, and then one scene where we're seeing how evil he actually is, which is a very much a trope of buddy cop movies from the 80s, is having this like, affluent person in public who's like, oh, I'm doing good things for the community, I'm a nice rich person, blah 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 blah, but behind closed doors they're like a mob boss and they're breaking legs and whatnot.
Yeah, it's like a diplomat who gets some sort of, what would you call it?
Immunity!
There you go.
Yes. Right, so you've got like that kind of trope, and I'm fine with them using that trope, but you literally get these two scenes of each side of it, and then the very next time you see this villain is the same sort of lead-in scene to like, we're in the third act at that point, and it's the scene where all the showdown stuff's going to kick off, and it has it achieves this wonderful like two-sided thing, and I'm using wonderful sarcastically here for the record, where it somehow feels like it rushes its conclusion, but also has like a 10-minute bit that feels tacked on. Like, it feels like it rushes to an end, and then I'm like, oh, it feels like the movie just ended. Oh no, here's another 10 minutes of stuff that we're tacking on after the fact. So somehow it feels both rushed, and yet a chunk of it feels tacked on. And that's impressive in terms of like how to make your movie feel like it's well paced and feel like it's unfolding in a nice natural way. So I like the kind of the premise, I like the concept, I like the two leads, I like their chemistry, but I think the plot and the villain and all that side of it completely, and what's so annoying, I can't really say this till spoilers, but there's an element they introduce in the third act, not at the very end, but there's like a small thing they introduce early on in the third act that I thought could have been so interesting to explore way, way more, and it's barely an afterthought the way it's brought up in this movie. So I'll bring that up when we're in spoilers properly. But there's definitely some other little ideas in there that I'm like, oh, that's just begging for some exploration, and it just doesn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you. I think that there is a problem with the pacing of this movie, but I think that my slightly more positivity is I was actually very engrossed in the world. I was actually engaged with the characters, and like the fact that they took so much time, yeah, they were just going around talking to people, but the fact that they were talking and they were getting more information about how the world works and how the different like dichotomies between the newcomers and the humans work out. I don't know. It got me engaged with the characters in a way that I feel like a lot of times with these sort of crime movies and stuff like that, it's all just one-liners and just relying off the chemistry of the leads. This one had that. I'm not saying it didn't, but it also built this world up that I actually felt engaged in. It felt like it was something that they put a lot of time and effort into to make it something special rather than it just being, yeah, you know, stereotypical sci-fi backdrop of whatever we want to do.
Oh,
yes,
no,
there's
like,
aliens.
I totally get that. I just wish they put half as much time into the actual story as opposed to just the world building. Because the story, you know, like I said, like sometimes these people are going to see are related to people that weren't even characters we saw on screen. There's scenes where, oh, the bad guy does something to someone, and this character he's doing it to is not even a character we've really been introduced to. We've heard his name a couple of times, but he's not really a character. He's just a prop for this thing to happen to. And I couldn't help but feel like some of these things could have been better set up where it mattered to the audience that X character was the one that was being tortured or whatever. I think it's weird because it does do a lot of good world building, but at the same time it fails at some basic storytelling. And I think that's like kind of the, which is not to say that I think it's bad overall. I think it's very watchable overall. I like the vibe of it. But it was so funny actually, the director, who you probably have never heard of before, and I don't blame you because he's not done much. But Graham Baker, who directed this, it just so happens that for the Octoberthon, we did The Omen 3, and I recorded that mere days ago. And when I looked up the director of that one and I saw Alien Nation, I went, that's a coincidence that we're recording that in a few days' time. Especially since this director only has like 7 movies, and to be honest, most of them look more extra reels worthy than like the two that I've reviewed already.
Are you telling me that John Stamos in Born to Ride is not top tier cinema?
Nope.
All right, fair enough.
Well, I mean, I've not seen it. I can't say for sure. But if I was a betting man...
I mean, it doesn't even... Hold on, there it is. Reception. Entertainment Weekly gave it a D+. Quote, a big failure on the most basic dramatic level. All right, so it might not be great.
I'll add it to the extra reels list. Very good.
Oh, God damn it. So one thing I did want to bring up, and I'm not using this as a defense because the movie we get is the movie we get. But there was apparently, it was supposed to come out summer of '88 and it got pushed to the fall because they took it to the editing room and they just hacked it down. Like it was originally 2 hours, give or take, and they just trimmed the crap out of it.
I am not surprised to hear that because it being a brisk 90 minutes did not feel right for the type of movie it is. It felt like there was development between the two leads being left on the table. It felt like some of the things that the movie does in the last act felt like they came out of relative nowhere. Just all of a sudden, this is what it is now. And I think, yeah, the movie feels like it was chopped up. I do wonder if they'll ever... Maybe the footage is long lost or something, but it would be interesting to see if there's ever like a director's cut or something like that down the line.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would go through the effort of watching specifically a director's cut, especially if it doesn't add anything to like the world and only just adds to this specific plot. But I will say that this movie at least got me interested enough that like I wouldn't mind watching some of those direct-to-TV movies and just seeing what they do with them. I'm not expecting them to be great, but I am curious to see what they would do.
I mean, you're not getting James Caan in those. I'm pretty sure.
And I feel like the moment I dive into it and be like, all right, give me more, and then I realize that whatever leads they pick are gonna have the chemistry of like a rock and air. It's just gonna be worthless to me.
They'll have the same chemistry that the TV version of RoboCop has with the TV version of Lewis.
So nothing.
Which is to say not the same chemistry that movie RoboCop had with movie Lewis.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, the makeup in the aliens is pretty simple, which I think is for the best because you have to have lots and lots of them around in certain scenes. One thing that should be mentioned is, yes, well, the term for them, the official term for them is newcomers. That's like the polite way of saying it. There is like a derogatory term that's getting thrown around as well, where they call them slags, which is funny because in the UK that means slut. But
I mean, we see a couple of them that are very promiscuous.
I mean, yeah, we see that they've got a whole like neighborhood. They've got like their own prostitutes. They've got their own crime underworld is sort of forming as we speak. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting ideas. But it's almost like, in some ways, like as a like, would something that's maybe a little less on the nose be a little harder hitting than this? I don't know, but at the very least, them having this premise because they want to do the buddy cop thing obviously opens, you know, whatever doors they wanted to do with that side of it. Also,
I don't want to compare this too much to Bright, because obviously it is its own thing. It's not doing the same exact stuff. Because...
I do have a question before you finish whatever you're saying, David. Do you actually remember any of Bright?
I do. Like, I gave it a fair shot, and I do remember a bit of it. But again, it was the same sort of thing where I was trying to engage with it on the world building level. I was trying to engage with it with this idea of like, okay, they've built this idea of how they want to build this world, what all has changed in there. And I think that the world building of Bright is actually its biggest failure. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things going wrong in that movie, but I think that the world building is the biggest failure because it feels so tacked on. Like, this is a world where these fantasy creatures have been around forever. Like, they were always a part of society. And yet it feels like all of the references and all of these things that they're coming up with were things that were still would have made sense, like, even if they just showed up 10 years ago. You know, it doesn't feel like there was a massive change in how society would have been because they were there. This one, I think, does a great job because they explicitly say they showed up 3 years ago. Everything was identical up until 3 years ago. And then we started changing. And that's why these tiny things where you see like, oh, they had a quarantine process before they could get out. They essentially had their own Ellis Island of getting like English names so that way they would be able to integrate better. Like, there is this process to it that it feels very built into the world from the bottom up instead of tacked on of just, well, we're filming in LA and we don't want to have to change anything, so we're just gonna not, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they set up the whole... That's like a running thing in the movie, is that they all have kind of weird names that they've picked, and, you know, like, he's like, oh, yeah, I'm Francisco, and he's like, what's your first name? He's like, Samuel, and then he stops and goes, Sam Francisco? I'm not calling you that.
It's heavily implied that basically by the time that they got through, like, the first 200 or so aliens, the people who were in charge of giving out names just started trying to be funny about it. Like, they were just throwing out like, here's Sam Francisco.
Do you know, I actually didn't get that impression. I thought the impression I got is that the aliens were picking these names, and it was they're like, I don't know, like
representing the culture.
Yeah, like just their naiveness, their whatever. Like, it's something like that they were looking like, because there's a joke later on about why, I won't spoil it here, but why he's named his son a certain name, and that felt like he's picked that name, and I felt like that ran into the same thing with all their names. He
definitely did pick that name, but there is a line from James Caan where he says, were you by chance towards the back of the line when they were handing out names, which I thought implied that they were, you know, being given the names by the...
Oh, no, you're right. That line does imply that. I kind of took it as like a, oh, we'll do something from the culture. And then, you know, he looks over and sees San Francisco on a map and goes, I'll have that, pretty much.
That one looks easy to spell. Yeah. There was also, just tiny trivia bit. Apparently, the original script did not have him named San Francisco. They had him named George Jetson. But they couldn't get the rights for the Jetsons, so they just changed it to San Francisco. But they kept George as a holdover relic from that.
Okay, all right, interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to add before we get into spoilers, I don't think.
Nah.
I wouldn't say the visuals of the movie, the cinematography, sticks out that much, to be honest. Nothing really sort of stood out to me, as a, you know, either in the action scenes or when they're doing... anything. It just kind of felt by the numbers, sort of 80s buddy cop movie in terms of its shooting style.
Yeah, I think the best it ever really got for me was actually the opening sequence where we're showing kind of like a documentary style thing of here's how we got to this point.
Yeah, it's like a news report, I think, they're watching on TV.
It felt very District 9 in a lot of ways. There's like people who are just holding cameras, recording like a flying saucer and whatnot. That was super engaging for me because I was like, oh, okay, are we getting like an 80s version of District 9? But, you know, it only lasts for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then it gets into a pretty standard shot.
Yeah, like, as far as, like, compared to District 9, the idea of aliens arriving, the visual of the ship above the city, and then the idea that they all have really sort of dumb, like, you know, English-speaking names, that's where the comparisons to District 9 kind of end, is just those, because then it becomes more what Bright ended up being.
Well, I mean, that and also the prejudices and stuff like that, but that's shared between all three.
Oh yeah, sure. But, like, I mean in terms of, like, plot, in terms of, like, anything that it's doing. Whereas District 9 obviously is like, no, they're in like a camp, like an internment camp, and they're, you know, that goes its own way. Fundamentally, the arc of the movie is kind of similar, though, in that you've got someone who's prejudiced, who's going to, by the end, obviously have a respect for his alien brethren. Obviously, it plays out very differently in an 80s buddy cop style movie versus what District 9 is. Now, for the record, I love District 9. I think District 9 is one of the best sci-fi movies of the last 20, 30 years. So... this is never going to measure up to that, just for the record, before we continue anything here.
That's fine. That's fair.
That's it. It's better than Bright. I'll give it that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I would watch paint dry and say, yep, that's better than Bright. It blows my mind that Netflix thought they were going to be able to turn that into like a franchise thing.
Oh, yeah. There was plans for movies, animated things, maybe a TV show, comic book. Yeah, there was a whole... And then there was like one and done. No, it's dead. Like, no one wanted it.
I'm sure attaching Will Smith into the main role also didn't help things either. But
no, I saw a great thing on social media the other day. I say Twitter, but someone said there was like a post from like some statistics account talking about, oh, this is the most watched thing on Netflix in the last year, and it was a photo of what's her face from Stranger Things, right?
Okay,
11, whatever her real name is, I can't remember, right?
Never could I.
And she's holding a bow and arrow. And said, oh, her movie so-and-so is the most watched movie in Netflix in the last 12 months. And then the quote tweet was just, I have no idea what this is. And I was like, yeah, I also have no idea what this is. It looks like some sort of Lady Robin Hood thing, maybe? But I don't know.
Holding a boat. Okay. There's one called Damsel.
Is it that?
She's got a sword on the poster.
That sounds right. That's probably that.
Seems right. I've never heard of this movie. Nope. It came out in March.
That's just to show what the state of like Netflix original movies are. That like they're so off the radar.
Yeah.
The only one I knew about from this year was Atlas, unfortunately.
That is not a good sign for Netflix.
So anyway, spoilers? Are there spoilers?
Yeah. Nah. I mean, look, we talked about the cinematography. Score's nothing really that big either. So yeah, I'm good with spoilers.
Yeah. All right, so spoilers for Alien Nation, the original movie. You have been warned. So, yeah, like I said, we have this sort of like intro where it's like, and I don't know if we'll go necessarily in order with this because I feel like following the investigation is a bit of a fool's errand, to be honest. But the opening, I think, does stick out on its own quite well because it's like, okay, it's James Caan, and of course he's got a partner, and I'm like, given the premise of this movie, I don't fancy your future, Mr. Partner. I don't think you're going to be lasting too long.
To be fair, I knew it was buddy cop, and I knew that like eventually he'd have to get with an alien, but there was a chance he survived. It didn't explicitly say he was going to die, but the moment that I saw characters brandishing guns, I'm like, okay, buddy, I'm sorry. You have to go now.
Yeah, you ain't making out of this. You got 2 days till retirement. Your time is up. But yeah, there's a lot of their conversation in the car that sets up how James Caan feels about this world, and he doesn't like them. He hates being in their district because they're in, you know, quote unquote Slag Town as they call it, which is, you know, like where a lot of them are living. And he's
and it is like an actual town. It's not like a shanty town or anything like that.
Yeah,
It's a part of LA that's just kind of been adopted by them.
It's like Chinatown, effectively, right? And he's, you know, he's just saying what he thinks to them, how he thinks it's weird, and the idea that, you know, some guys are like going to the prostitutes and stuff, and the partner kind of like jokes as if, well, I know what their bits are like, and he's like, no way you don't, no.
And then they get a drunkard who comes up, and they reveal that the alien race gets drunk off of soiled milk.
Yes, and it smells very bad, which upsets James Caan. And then the character stuff we get from this scene is James Caan has a daughter who's getting married, and he doesn't want to go to the wedding, and the main reason being is he feels kind of ashamed I mean, he doesn't say this out loud, but it's implied via like the partner sort of prodding him.
Yeah.
That he's ashamed that his ex-wife's new husband is paying for everything, and he can't really afford to like chip in anything really. And that's he's feeling a sense of shame about that. So I mean, it sort of bakes into that idea that part of his prejudice and like him lashing out constantly is kind of like, you know, it's like a projecting thing. It's like, oh, he's kind of ashamed of who he is, so it bothers him that there's new people here, quote unquote, taking jobs. In fact, one of the documentary things at the start that we kind of glossed over is there's a couple of little interviews with like people on the street, and one guy's like, hey, they're really smart. Like apparently like their 10-year-olds are like already doing like college level stuff, and like if they're that smart at 10, like then they're going to take my job. Like, you know, he says that, he literally says that line. So
yeah.
That it's not hiding what it's talking about in any way, shape, or form.
I think the first guy that they interviewed was basically like, look, I don't got anything against him, but why did we have to take him? Let's ship him off to Russia or something. And like one of our characters that we're following in the bar is like, I'll toast to that. That sounds like a great idea. So there's always just this casual speciesism, if you want to call it that, just undercurrent throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I was having the thought because later on we find out that one of their main big weakness is salt water, right? Salt water is like acid to these like aliens, where it'll just melt them. And part of me thought, wait, why did you land? Why did you hover over LA then? Why are you near the coast? Why not go to the middle of the country?
It's literally the problem of signs as well. It's the exact same thing.
But then I thought about it and went, no. If they've done any research, they know California's by far more progressive and will probably be more willing to take them in than any of the states in the middle of the country.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? So there is some logic here.
You get the middle of the country, you're getting an Independence Day. Full stop.
You're getting like some weird new version of the Salem witch trials where it's like the alien race trials. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we've discovered that if you didn't commit this crime, all you have to do is drink this salt water. If you live, then you'll be fine.
To be fair, it's pretty obvious visually if they're an alien or not.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, entries all this stuff, and they're driving past like a small store, and there's like two suspicious-looking aliens going in.
By the way,
yes.
When they're driving down the streets and talking, did you see the movie that was playing in the theater?
Oh, I did. Rambo 6, which is funny because we got to Rambo 5 eventually, but there's been no 6 yet, so it's not quite. And this was one of the other things that I think backs up my timeline of the events is that, like, would they have thought they were on Rambo 6 by 1991?
I mean, did Back to the Future really think we're going to get to Jaws 17 or whatever?
Yeah, but at least that was 30 years, though. That was, like, this movie was only... If this was set in 1991, it's only 3 years after, like, Rambo 3 only came out in, like, 85. The Rambo 4 didn't even exist yet.
Hold on. So, First Blood was 82, and then 85, and then 88 was Rambo 3.
So Rambo 3 was coming out the year this came out. That's a bit of a stretch for 3 years in the future.
I don't like what you're saying, but I don't have an argument. So,
to be honest, even 6 years in the future is what I'm saying it is a bit far-fetched for 3 more sequels. It's possible.
Maybe Stallone just like really needed the money, and he was just going to keep going.
No, because if this is 1994, he's got Demolition Man. He's
Oh yeah, I'm saying 1988 thought that 1994 Stallone was going to need it.
Yeah, okay, I guess. I don't know. I mean, 85 was Rocky 4. Like, you know. That said, though, once you get to 1990 and Rocky 5 comes out, I mean, things aren't looking so hot for a little bit. I was like, oh no.
That's when we get the Rambos.
Oh dear. Anyway, yeah, there was a couple of things like that where it was like just sort of jokes in the background about like where we might be in the future, which, to be honest, even for 6 years after the release of the movie, it still feels like some of them are a little bit too jokey. Like, I mean, really, 6 years later and you think we're going to have this, or this. I mean, there's no like technology or anything like that. Everything's still just pretty much present day stuff, except from the aliens, obviously. So, you know.
I mean, even then, I would... With the presence of the aliens who have like a flying saucer, I would fully accept that they were able to make massive leaps in technology because they would obviously have scientists checking out the saucer and getting some tech from that. If anything, the media stuff is the weird standout things. I'm
sure that is happening, but only like top level government scientists have got access to it, and it's all You know, it's all been used for
military stuff.
Yeah, military, maybe NASA a push. Like that's not trickled down to consumer products yet. That'll take a little while.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So yeah, we have this kind of thing where they sort of like see that something suspicious is happening, and I actually thought, because to be honest, even though I'd seen this before, other than the basic premise and that James Caan was here, I'd forgotten like all the plot. So I didn't really remember where this was going, other than like I knew the partner was going to die, because obviously, but I was like, oh, are they going to make a mistake here and they're going to be basically racially profiling two aliens? But yeah, but then the aliens pull out shotguns and start like threatening the store owner, who happens to also be an alien, because they're in Alien Town. So like everyone here's in the situation, like other than the cops, are all aliens. Yeah. But yeah, we get basically the shotgun that one of these aliens is using is like super armor piercing. So the death of the partner, which for the record comes after a whole section that's a bit too cartoony, I think, for the movie's tone, which is he hides in a shootout behind a pole. So he's kind of like a cartoon character, sort of like trying to just sort of hold his stomach in,
right,
whilst this like shotgun's like blasting things. But the end goal of it though is that he's hiding behind a car, and this shotgun is so powerful that it's going all the way through the car, and he's basically just going like dodging to the left constantly as the bullet holes are appearing next to him until there's no more car left and he's got nowhere to go, and then the bullets come through his chest, and like, you know, that's
look, I'm not gonna blame the man. Obviously there were no good answers there, but I do think that staying upright as you see the holes blasting through the cars may have been a dumb move on his part. Maybe
roll back to where the bullet holes have already been, perhaps, would have been a choice. Or just
hit the deck, like
hit the deck, yeah.
Make your general profile smaller.
Yep, he did it so well with the pole, like the telephone pole or whatever it was. No, it wouldn't be it was a traffic pole, but regardless,
it was a light post.
A light post, yeah, whatever it was. So something you see in the street, right? Yeah. It was something there.
I mean, you say it's a bit too cartoony, but I feel like this entire sequence was like, as he's hiding behind the car, there's a dude who was just sleeping in the driver's seat, and he pulls him out and just like, "Hello, sir, we're having a bit of a situation here. Could you please step out of the vehicle?"
That's true. That's true. There's a sense of humor here that's a little bit weird. But it ends up in a chase where James Caan's chasing after the two suspects into a dark kind of like alley area. There's like a sort of duct.
Yeah, it's a tunnel.
Yeah, some sort of tunnel, yeah, near a sewer system or whatever. One of the aliens has gotten away, but the one that stayed behind takes a drug, which in my head at the time I called Venom, because it made me think of Venom, the way it souped him up and he came charging out at him. That's very Venom-esque. But
pretty much it.
James Caan empties an entire clip into him to take him down, which does do the trick eventually, but there's a bit touch and go there for a second.
Yeah, later on in the movie they get to the like biology of the aliens, and they say essentially they're very tough and they've got what are functionally two different hearts, and if you don't shoot them through both of them, then they're not going to go down.
We also find out that their weak spot's not where the testicles are, at least on a human being. It's possible it's still their testicles, they're just in a very different spot, but it's more
like
of
on the rib cage.
Yeah, it's on the rib cage on one side where you can hit and you get the ball hitting effect, as it were.
I think that Sam called it like, or George I should say, called it a nerve bundle, which I think that's a fair description.
That's fine. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the setup of the movie. His partner's dead, and obviously he kind of wants revenge for that. He first interacts with Sam, which I think you probably should call him Sam in a weird way, because like imagine you met someone, or maybe not you, but like imagine you were there for someone meeting someone else who came from a different country, and your English-speaking friend said, "I'm not going to call you that. That's a dumb name. I'm going to call you Steve." You wouldn't call him Steve because that's actually offensive.
For respect of the character, I agree. For the fact that he just absolutely rolls with it, and I don't think they call him Sam more than like 3 times over the course of the movie. It's always George. It is a bit weird to slip into that, but
I mean that's fair. But I just mean on a pure like thinking about it sense, it would be disrespectful.
I mean, even later on, I'm not going to try to find the moment, but they explicitly have him say what his like real alien name is, and it's like Stanja Sorenza or something like that. And it's if we want to be very respectful to the character, we'd call him that.
Yeah, but he's at least accepted an English-speaking name. It's not like he's on board with that one. I think he understands that human beings are going to have trouble with that. Although he does hit back to James Caan, whose name's Matt Sykes, and he's like, hey, your name Sykes actually sounds like this word in our language. And he's like, what does that mean? Shithead.
I love that moment. I think that's such a good, like, taking him down a peg just by saying, like, yeah, no, you think my name of San Francisco sounds silly. What do you think it sounds to me when every time I want to get your attention, I call you a shithead?
Yeah, that's him taking a little bit of his own medicine there in that scene, because he's still being a prick to him constantly. Yeah. So yeah, he first meets him here because Sam happens to be the uniformed cop that shows up as backup and sort of reaches down to see if he's okay. And when James Caan turns around and sees an alien, he just punches him immediately. He's just swinging, no questions asked.
Yep.
And then there's a moment when they're at the back at the store where the shootout happened, and all the police are there and they're checking the crime scene, where Sam is talking to other police officers and mentions, oh, this might be like, you know, this murder that happened of another alien, like just yesterday or whatever it is. And he's like, yeah, this what was the case?
Bullet type.
Yeah,
the bullet type was the same type that was used.
That's what the connection was, but I was trying to remember the name because they actually bring up this dead alien a few times.
Hubbley?
Hubbley, that was it, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I will say, I think that this movie would have been a lot easier to keep track of everybody if all of them had the, like, weird but very recognizable names. Something like San Francisco or George Jetson, something that you can just get a mental image of and relate it to something. I
bet Hubbley is part of, like, a funny name. It's just more hidden because we don't hear the whole thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But I'm assuming that there's a writer's joke in there somewhere that we're just not getting.
I mean, possibly. I think that it just would have been better if pull the Zombieland treatment, give all of them city names, and that would allow me to keep track of things a lot easier in terms of who's related to what, rather than trying to remember Hubbley, Porter, Strader, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a nice moment here though, because when he's saying this, and James Caan's over at the door, and he overhears some of it, he kind of speaks up a little bit and says, "Oh, do you think the two cases are connected?" But by the time he says it, Sam's already kind of walked away and doesn't really hear him. So James Caan just kind of gets frustrated and leaves. But I like that little moment. It's kind of one of the more nuanced moments out of the whole setup, because everything's very on the nose. Everything's very, you know, aggressive. He's saying how much he hates them and whatnot. Like he's not pulling any punches when he's talking about them to his partner. And then obviously he punches him when he first meets him. It's a whole thing. And I kind of like this little moment of James Caan actually realizing that he might be of help and he wants his help, and that he's not hearing him and he feels rejected almost. And it almost feels like a little just dessert for the fact that you just with the way you're acting, the way you're swinging without asking questions, and now you actually want his help. Like he does not like owe you respect. Like he does not owe you anything.
Oh yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think it also comes, it hits extra hard because obviously the reason that he's so concerned about it is because it just killed his partner. So it is absolutely something that he is very invested in getting more information for, and having this one guy who knows what it is being the dude that he just decked in the face earlier, like he's going to feel bad about that. He's going to feel more upset of what he did because it's going to be harder to solve for his partner's sake.
Yeah. So we see him go home. His apartment's a shithole, messy. He's got sour milk in the fridge. That'll come back up later.
You know, in case he has guests over.
In case he has any alien guests over, yes. And yeah, I mean, ultimately the setup of the movie, and I'd forgotten this detail, which is quite interesting. He's not forced to partner up with Sam. He volunteers because the captain comes out and says, hey, they're doing a new initiative where they've promoted one of the aliens to detective, and one of you are going to be partnered with them, and someone's going to volunteer today, or I'll pick a volunteer. And you know, James Caan looks over at the window in his office and sees that it's this alien that he met the night before, and he makes the choice to go over. Now, obviously, he has some motives here. He knows that this alien, Sam, might know some stuff that's related to his partner's death, and that's why he wants to work with them. But no one else is willing to do it. When he walks up to the office, all the other cops are like, where are you going? Like, what are you doing? Like, you know, there's this kind of, like, just sort of blanket racism that they're all kind of a part of. Which,
oh, yeah, no, they absolutely open up their discussions in terms of, like, parallels to affirmative action and such. They're just like, oh, what? He couldn't have been on the force for more than a year. Like, and he's already bumped up to that. That's just because he's an alien.
And they keep you thinking about comparing it to actual racism as well. Not just because of that, but because there's a Mexican detective there. And one of the guys says something racist about Mexicans. And he's like, hey. And he sort of like shuts them down quite quickly. But it's just sort of like keeps it in your mind. Is like, hey, that's kind of what we're talking about right now. We're talking about that subject.
It's like, hey, don't forget, a racist is going to continue to be racist even if new races show up. Like, they're going to keep being bad people. I did really like how this scene is introduced, though, in that the two cops there that he's talking to are the ones that are actually in charge of his partner's, like, murder investigation. So he's not able to do anything in regards to that. It belongs to a different people, and he's too close to it anyway. So instead, what he does is when he sees Sam there, he puts it together. Sam said that those bullets were used in a different case. If we investigate that other case, then we can link it back to my partner's death, and I can get justice in like a roundabout way.
Yeah, he's thinking outside the box, and he brings this up to the captain, and the captain's not even having it at all. But there happens to be a rep there for the mayor who's like sort of like here to like not force, but like usher in this
image.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So he's like, hey, no, this would be great for the mayor's new initiative. You know, if they solve a murder in Alien Town, you know, with the first alien detective, this would be a great thing for PR. So the captain's kind of forced into letting this happen, and that sets us off, and thus begins all of the back and forth, which is good, but also all of the very kind of repetitive, like going to a person and talking to them about the case, and like we do a lot of that. Like that's the next like 40 minutes of the movie's that.
Yeah, it's they're building up this network, they're building up how everybody's related to each other, but it is all done through very straightforward interviewing. Like, that's the thing. It's police work. It is, if you were to actually film police work, it'd be this plus like 17 hours of paperwork. That's how it goes. There's not gunfights and stuff like that all the time. But obviously that does not make a very intriguing movie to be just following interviews for the entirety of the time.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to writing, is that other movies have handled it in a way that doesn't betray what the work actually is, but does not feel repetitive and doesn't just feel like a convoluted web of characters that it's hard to keep track of all of them at a certain point.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is I don't even think it feels that complex by the time you actually get to the end and it's all wrapping up. It's actually fairly straightforward. It's just not that intuitive as they're going from character to character and like who's related to, because they're jumping over from like, oh, we're interviewing someone that's related to this murder case that we're officially on, but then we're going over and talking to like the wife of the victim in the store from the start of the movie, but then we're jumping over to the coroner, and then we're jumping over to the son of the woman from the store from the other case. So because they're jumping between the people related to characters in both cases, it's like it's a little all over the place in terms of following that.
Yeah. Again, I think this is, as much as the movie itself is pointing out this sort of thing with a lot more like the racist characters, I think that it is a problem of visually there are not a lot of distinctive features that are separating these characters. Like Hughley, Strader, and I've already forgotten the middle one. One of the characters is like not even a character. He's already dead before it starts, so like it doesn't even matter. But the other ones we do meet, and I couldn't tell you any differences between them. Like the only ones that stand out are Sam, because he is in a detective's like suit and tie the whole time, and Terence Stamp, because he's Terence Stamp. The moment he opens his mouth, you're like, that's Terence Stamp. And
he's the main villain, so he sticks out just in terms of his prominence in the scenes. Yeah, it is a bit of a problem. Obviously, there is a lot of back and forth between the two characters that is kind of, entertaining. Such as Sam saying, hey, we're meant to be on our case, as aren't we? I'd like to stick to the rules and play it by the book. And immediately James Caan just stops the car, even though it causes a traffic jam, and says, now listen up, partner, right? Do you not think that it would be helpful if these two cases are connected, that the other case might illuminate some of our evidence that would help us solve the case? Would you agree with that? And, that was entertaining. Yeah. There's also the whole bit where for some reason there's a condom. Like, I remember how the condom came up.
Yeah, that one, you lost me on that one. I watched the scene through twice, and I still am not entirely sure what they were even looking through here. It's somebody's like, it's probably Hughley's like leftover bits, like things that were in his pockets, but then that still doesn't explain why there's a condom.
That's why I thought that, but it doesn't make any sense because the whole joke that plays out in a minute is about how about how Sam doesn't know what it is because they don't use them, so that doesn't make sense for one. And also, one of the lines in the middle of the scene is that he yells over to the receptionist at, I think, the coroner's office they're at, and says, hey, do you need this for anything? And the little joke is she goes, no, I've got my own. Which made me think it was like something that was like there at the hospital, like a, free contraception out of the desk or something. I don't know. But anyway, the whole joke of the scene is that he doesn't know what it is, and James Caan's like, it's a rubber, it's a condom. You put it on your penis, and then he opens it, and Sam looks at it, gives it a bit of a squint, and goes, and it fits? And he's like, yeah, it stretches. He's like, still it fits. So the joke is that the aliens have much bigger dicks than human beings. That's the joke.
I mean, on its own, as a scene, as like a joke that was bounced around the writer's room, I'm fine with it. I think, it's got some comedic beats to it. It just feels very out of place, and by the time we hit the end of the movie, it's not even something that ever really, like, comes back in any way. Like, there's no reference even to it. It just is there for the sake of, haha, fish out of water joke where they don't know what a condom is.
I think it also feels a bit weird because, like, there's several scenes in the movie, including, like, the opening car ride we talked about, where they talk about how there is interspecies sex happening and there is, like, a fetish. And it isn't just like a one-way thing. Both sides seem to be into it in some capacity. Later on, there's that one alien chick that kind of gets all over James Caan because she's like, oh, you've not been with one of us. That's exciting, and starts feeling him up, right? I think this feels a bit strange to me because the reaction... Like, I thought it would have been a little bit funnier if, as James Caan looks a bit insecure because he's realizing what Sam's saying here is that, oh, my thing's too big for this puny little device... Like, if it cut to the receptionist who was typing away and just showed her having a little smirk that she thought it was funny that James Caan felt insecure, I think it would have been a much funnier joke. Not because she's excited by the idea of the big alien dong, but just because she can see it's making him uncomfortable and she thinks that's a little bit funny. I think that'd have been more of a joke. I think as it is, it just feels a bit weird and out of place with the rest of the sex jokes in the movie, where they all the rest of them make it seem like, oh no, the two species are completely compatible, but if the dongs are that different, are they? I mean, maybe you do other stuff, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. They just do like an Avatar mind meld or something like that. That's how they have their sex.
They use the 3 seashells.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. That was for pooping. That's actually kind of a gross joke. I
wasn't gonna say it. I was gonna let it sit just in case you wanted it to. But yeah, it's a certain choice you've made there, Peter.
It's because I referenced Demolition Man earlier, and it was the first thing that sprung into my head. But that's not actually how they had sex in that movie. It's they had like VR headsets they used. Anyway,
look, if there's one thing I know about humanity, even half far into the future, they will find a way to incorporate the 3 seashells into sex.
I love in that movie where he's like, I thought we'd do it the old-fashioned way, and Sandra Bullock goes, with bodily fluids? Gross. And then all I could think was, yes, the best part. Come on, body fluids. That's what it's all about, baby.
So the checking, the condom scenes and all that happened after they were in the coroner's office. And during that sequence, we have Sam is looking over the alien body, and he's talking to one of the coroners who also is an alien, and they start using like their native tongue to speak secretly. And basically he wants to run some blood tests on this guy because he notices something weird about him.
Yeah, this gets into the greater world building that kind of happens with the backstory of the aliens, and it is kind of interesting because they don't really dwell in this too much, but the implication later, right? Because it's clear that Terence Stamp's alien is making this drug and he wants to distribute it. Okay, that's fair enough. They're also using the fact that these aliens are immune to methane or high concentrations of methane, and they're using them for that work, but secretly it's actually just a lab making this drug. And there's some good hints to like how severe this stuff is. Obviously we got the tease with the bad guy like using it like venom at the start of the movie.
He just had like 2 drops and he was already super powered.
But in the scene where Terence Stamp's like killing another partner who doesn't want to like make the drug, I did think it did a decent job here of that like partner who's about to get thrown in the ocean and melt, right? He seems to not want to be a part of this, regardless of the fact that the villain's saying, hey, we can sell this and be rich and have comforts we've never known. But later on in the movie, when it turns out like what this drug actually was used for in this alien race, because it's not new to them, right? This is something that he's kind of like making again based on something they used to have. We find out that they were a slave race and they were designed to need this drug, and it would be this high, and it would be the one like thing they would get after a hard day of work, is that they'd be given a little bit of this drug, and that would make them want it more, so they'd work harder, and then they'd get a little bit more, and they'd work harder. So the idea that this guy, who's kind of a villain who gets drowned by the main villain, is like, you know what, this is actually kind of crossing a line. I don't want to like make our race addicted to this and exploit them, because that's all this thing was designed for, was to exploit our entire race and control us. Yeah. So that kind of tease, and then like Sam's reaction when he realizes this stuff is being used, and like his then goal is to like destroy all of it, and like we can't let this become a thing, we can't let this be distributed. We have to stop this. To hell with the case. I don't care about proving anyone's done anything. I just want to destroy the existence of this drug. Like, that's what his goal is at a certain point once we're in the third act.
I really appreciate that. I mean, we'll get to it more, but I appreciate the fact that he elaborates on specifically, like, we cannot let anyone in humanity know that, because, like, if they do, it's going to cause so many problems with our relations. Like, you're going to immediately have, like, subjugation stuff going on. Like, it's immediately going to cause all these problems. So we have to nip it at the bud before anybody finds out about it.
Yeah, it's like, he doesn't want his race to go through what it's went through before. It's pretty heinous. And then also, it will make more humans fear them because of what it could possibly do. And the idea that they've brought this drug that might be on the streets. And who knows what happens when a human takes it, if it even does anything. But
yeah, I mean, I think they get to later that it's just, it tastes like dish detergent. And he's just like, all right, and that's all it'll do for you. It doesn't matter anymore.
Well, actually, this was actually the thing I was referring to earlier, is that when we get into the third act and there's a bit of a showdown when Terence Stamp's holding a meeting to like talk about selling it and whatever, he's got like a big case of it. And Sam comes in and he's holding a bomb in his hand and whatever, but ignoring all that, there's a great line from the villain where he says, hey, Earth, people of Earth, human beings don't know what this substance is. So it's actually not illegal. There is nothing illegal about having it. We could have like a case full of like orange juice and it would be just as illegal as this stuff is, because there's no law against it. And I really wish that they played with this idea more, that there's stuff that they've brought that clearly is morally wrong, that Sam's got a problem with, but technically there's no laws on Earth to like restrict it. That's actually a really fascinating concept to play with, and it's a shame that it's really just this one line of dialogue in this one scene that never really does anything, never goes anywhere.
No, I mean, that's the common thing of like, oh, you've got a person from a foreign land coming and he's able to dodge around federal laws because of that thing about diplomats doing something. You said it earlier. What was the word I was looking for?
I don't think it applies here, but I'll say it anyway. Diplomatic immunity!
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's the same sort of concept. Is the whole reason that diplomatic immunity works is you are not allowed to be charged for a crime if it is not also a crime in your, like, home country as well. Like, they can deport you, they can send you out of the country, but, like, you can't be charged for the crime. It's the same sort of thing here. Like, in the planet Earth, this drug is just a bunch of chemicals. It's unregulated. No one cares. It's whatever, because it doesn't affect humans. And so it's a thing where, because the law is not on the books, it can't actually charge for anything.
I just thought it was such an interesting concept. It feels a little bit sci-fi because it's just a truly alien thing that we just don't have a name for. We don't understand it. And it doesn't even affect us even, right, by the sounds of it. So I think that's such an interesting idea, and I love the idea of like that being established earlier in the movie, so that like you almost get that Lethal Weapon 2 style thing where the villain just kind of cackles and says, "You can't arrest me for this. This is not illegal." Like, if anything, like I almost would want them to like be more brazen with it. Like, why are you having secret meetings about it? It's not illegal. You could just have have a boardroom.
I'll walk down the street with it. That being said, I do like, in that same realm of world building, when we get the character who is thrown out into the ocean, it is treated as a murder. It is treated as a homicide, despite the fact that throwing someone into the ocean is not technically a murder. It, like, if it ends up with them dying, then yes, you could theoretically get like manslaughter. But it feels like this is one of those things where, in the 3-year time period, the laws have been adopted to say, like, if you purposely and intentionally put salt water on an alien, that is assault. That is something that is able to be grounds for murder if they end up dying because of it.
Did you just say putting salt water on an alien is an assault? It's a lot of salt.
It is. Some would argue about 50%.
Well, I will say this though: if you hold someone underwater, though, that is definitely still murder. So
oh yeah.
I don't know.
But
if
I'm saying like the intention. Like if you had a bunch of kids or whatever out playing, and one of them gets pushed into a pool. No,
I get what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that the implication from the scene I got is that the 4 humans that were taking him out into the water, I don't think they were just like leaving him. It seemed to me like they were going to like make sure he stayed there and died. Oh,
like held him down.
Yeah.
Under? Oh, okay, that's fair.
So, which is why I'm saying I'm pretty sure it's just a murder regardless. Like it's just.
I mean, yes, but even if you ignore that, there's at the beginning of the movie they also have the documentary thing of saying like, and because rights organizations and stuff like that basically got aliens full human rights.
Yes,
like, there was a process in this where they were able to adopt the laws to say humans and the newcomers, all of them apply under these laws.
Yeah. And I do like as well that when they get called up at the crime scene, immediately Sam is scared to go to the beach. Like he's the beach, and he can't even go down to the beach. He has to stay up, on the road nearby because he's so terrified of going near the water. That's kind of cool. What I don't like about this scene though, where we get like the villain, oh, I'm really maniacally evil and I'm going to kill someone who was kind of a business partner, is that this character they're killing, we've heard him mentioned a few times, but this is the first time we really see him. He's not even really a character, so it's hard to really care that much on an emotional level.
Yeah.
Or be invested in it from a story perspective, like who this is or why they're dying.
So I don't know the full story behind this, so I don't want to speak too much to it, but apparently the dude who is being killed, like visually in front of us, is in the original script a character we don't even know. He is a character that was completely cut out of the original story. And I mean, let me see if I can get the actual thing here. So there was a bit where there's a guy named Todd Watson, and the guy that we saw dragged into the water was Todd Watson. He was the guy who Harcourt was coming after, whatever. But then they, during the editing process, restructured the script and turned this into the character of Strader, who is the guy who runs the nightclub. And we essentially just lost an entire character, which is why I think it does feel a little bit weird here of we didn't really ever interact with this character or do anything like that. And I think it's because we couldn't ever show him beforehand because this death scene had to be repurposed as Strader. If we had shown Strader beforehand, we'd know that's not him in the death scene.
I think, and I want to make clear here, you get to have one character like that where you can start off with them dying at the start of the movie as the inciting incident and then discover more about them afterwards. The problem is, though, is that this is effectively the second character like that in this movie. You can't have multiple characters like that who are just nothing but dead bodies that we can't, like, I just that really was a problem for me in enjoying the story itself. And then obviously we've got all the other scenes of them going around talking to people. Eventually they go to the club, which is where we get Brian Thompson's character, who's the son of the woman who runs the store from the start of the movie, and he's in a gang.
The bar, but yeah.
Oh, he's in a bar.
Because there's a bar and there's a club.
Did we ever go to the club then?
Yeah, the club is where the girl stripper dancer.
Okay, yeah. Where we get the sexy dancing to the cover of the Rolling Stones song. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So we meet him, and he's like, this is where we get the weak spot's not in the crotch, because James Caan tries to kick him there, doesn't really do a whole lot. And this, the scene's fine. Like, it's like, again, it's the little interactions between Caan and San Francisco that are more memorable than anything that actually comes from the interrogation. The interview itself is just kind of like, he eventually mentions a name and says they were involved, which leads them to their next interview, and that's it. There's really nothing more interesting than that. And everything else is just an obstacle to get into that information, which, by this point, again, it's like the fourth interview we've had with some character. I mean, sometimes it's not a criminal, sometimes it's like the coroner or something, but it doesn't really, amount to anything that different in the grand scheme of things, which is why I do find it a bit repetitive.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a blending of buddy cop and like a neo-noir film, where the neo-noir is much more on the going around getting the info. Yes, you're still going to have action scenes to some extent, but there is a lot more of just talking to people, getting information, and finding out the larger conspiracy at play. But I do think that ultimately it doesn't lean heavily enough on the buddy cop like action aspects of it to make it as engaging as it should be.
And if I was to guess, or maybe not guess, but if I was to say where I feel like the most of the movie's missing, I would say the middle, because I feel like they spend the day going around and talking to people, and then that night he goes back to James Caan's place and they talk about the case, but ultimately they get drunk. He drinks the sour milk, James Caan drinks whatever booze he's got around. And they start, like, James Caan tries to tell him jokes, he shows him photos of his daughter, he does the same, he says, here's my son, my wife, blah, blah, blah.
By the way, they named him Richard after Richard Nixon,
Yes.
and James Caan was like, maybe tell them anybody else.
Yes, pick
Just
another Richard.
any other person.
Yeah. But, like, so it's like, okay, they're starting to bond a little bit. James Caan's starting to see him more as a person and less of a thing or another kind of thing, which is fine. And then they wake up that next morning and it's well actually someone's trying to plant a bomb in the car and Sam just kind of wakes up because he fell asleep in the car and like chases him off but doesn't really achieve and shooting him. He's too like hungover to get his gun out or anything like that.
Yeah, I think he calls it a milk over.
But then they get the call about the beach murder, right? And they go there. And there's a couple of nice moments here where James Caan effectively gets angry because the other cops are being racist towards his partner. And even though he wouldn't admit that he's sticking up for him, that's effectively what he does. Where he actually assaults this other cop by like bashing his face into the wheel for making some comments. And also the spray paint on the side of his car, ETPD.
Yeah.
Very, very witty.
I like this whole segment here. Like everything that you just covered. I think beginning with the drinking scene, there's one tiny subsequence that comes from Sam that I think is just absolutely fantastic of building up this idea from just all of the alien perspective to humanity of like, okay, clearly we're not treating them well from a human standpoint. We are treating them as second-class citizens and whatnot.
Oh, actually, I think I know what you're going to talk about. Is this the part of the conversation where he talks about how humans have given them comfort and rights and like a life that they've only ever dreamed of? But
it's the establishment that they were slaves, that they were like this race that was built for the subjugation under any other number of alien races, and that they never had this concept of freedom. So even them being treated as poorly as they are, it's a blessing, and they take it every single day. But then the counterpoint to that is they are given all these opportunities of equality, of being able to achieve these lives that they could never have imagined. And they look around at humanity and they wonder, why are you guys not taking full advantage of this? Why are you just letting this all pass you by?
Yeah, well, the exact phrasing he uses is that you offer us all this, and yet we're so confused and hurt by the fact that you don't actually live up to the ideals that you set out for yourselves. So it's this idea that the establishment and the people have gotten them rights and all that, and yet a lot of the human population still treat them like dirt. They still treat them like shit. They still clearly don't like them very much. And it's that, like, juxtaposition that they just don't understand. Like, you gave us all these opportunities, and yet a lot of you hate us for it. Like that's just a complex element for them to wrap their heads around.
Okay, I wasn't totally reading it as that way, but fair enough.
That's how I read it. So I like the scene at the beach where Caan sticks up for him, but I do think this is the moment where it feels like the movie's then missing a lot of stuff, because it feels like very, very quickly, because at this point in the movie, we're like maybe an hour in or something like that, I don't know exactly what the time is, but
pretty much.
At that point, we then just start barreling down to the third act, where they then go back to the lab quite quickly, they find the drug canisters and whatnot, and Sam freaks out and reveals to he's a little reluctant to reveal, but he does ultimately reveal a bunch of stuff to James Caan and says, hey, the rest of humanity can't know all this because they'd fear us, blah, 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 blah. And at that point, it's like, okay, we're just on the way to the villain, right? We're on the way to the third act showdown. And this is the portion of the movie where I feel like, where's the rest of the development here, where I really feel like they've really earned, because they do a whole thing towards the end where not only is James Caan willing to stick his neck out to save Sam, but Sam even like sticks his hand in salt water to like save James Caan at the end from a helicopter. And it's like, oh, they're really trying to save each other, fighting for each other. It's all very great. And I think the best way I can describe the pacing of this is actually in the very, very end of the movie, where for the first time in the entire film, for some reason, James Caan narrates, like, right at the very end, and he narrates for like maybe 15 seconds, and it legitimately sounds like he's late for his bus. He just sort of quickly comes in and says, "Oh, I've got," because he goes to his daughter's wedding at the end. Like, he obviously decides to do that because blah blah blah. But he's like, "Oh, my daughter's got a husband. I've got a partner. Everything's all right. Credits roll." Like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if that narration really offered me anything, James, because you didn't really tell me anything other than what I've already seen.
Yeah, that's fair. We hold on, I want to check the schedule, make sure it's already out at this point. Yes, it will be. So that's kind of exactly what happened at the end of Single White Female, which we did over on Collector's Cut.
That's right, where it's like
It was just that.
Yeah, just this rushed little line of dialogue, and then the credits started rolling. Like, it almost felt like the final word wasn't quite finished when the credits started rolling. So it's like, are you in a rush? Are you trying to make a deadline here?
Look, we're going to put this on TV. We know we are, and we have to wrap it up right. This is when the credits need to roll for us to fit in the ads.
It's just so strange.
Yeah. Now, I will say this: the sequence where Sam reveals the existence of the drugs, I think it may be scripted, it may be improv, I don't know, but it has one of the best, I think, just character moments in the movie from James Caan, which is during the initial fight, he injured his hand, so he's wearing bandages on it throughout the entirety of this movie. And as he's getting pissed off because Sam is not revealing whatever it is he found from the blood report, he gets so angry that he just slams his fist against the wall to like make a point in the moment. He's just like, "Tell me, goddammit." And the moment his fist hits the wall, he just like doubles over like, "Ah, son of a bitch. Ah, shouldn't have done that." But then he gets right back into the scene. Like, he just immediately does it. And just that tiny little thing, that tiny moment of showing that he got so into the, like, the theatricality of the moment, slamming his fist, and then like has to do like the double take of how much his hand hurts. Like, I don't know, something about that informed me of what kind of man he is, like how much he is into this case than anything else that was said in any of the surrounding scenes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because, again, I like all the world building of, like, their alien race and what this drug was to them before, this idea of this slave race, and they basically ran away on this ship and came to Earth, right? And, like, this is their kind of, they're literally refugees. And it's like, okay, all that stuff is super interesting and great, but immediately it's just like, oh, he's riding off to find the villain, who's Harcourt, played by Terence Stamp, and he goes in with the bomb that the bad guy tried to plant in the car to blow up James Caan's car. He just comes in with it in his hand and starts making threats and says he'll blow them all up to get rid of this drug. He doesn't care if it kills him. Like, that's how much this is important to him, to like not let his race go through this. And of course, James Caan shows up and saves him with, we've not talked about this yet, but as a result of the fancy, like, armor-piercing shotgun from earlier on that the villains are using, which, to be honest, I felt it never really came back up again, so I felt like, why bother, like, emphasizing it so much? That
struck me the sort of thing that got killed in editing.
Yeah.
Like, I have a feeling they really punched that in an earlier version of the draft and then just cut it down.
It seems like whatever payoff to, like, setting all that stuff up early on got cut out, but in retaliation to that, though, James Caan gets issued, like, a fancy, like, revolver with a huge laser sight on it that goes through armor. Like, he does a whole thing at the shooting range where he shoots through, like, a bulletproof vest. And that's the gun he's using at the end, and it's very loud, but the fact that it's armor piercing, I don't think is ever even that important in the actual action sequences towards the end.
Nope. There was one bit, and it results in, I think, the best development for Sam, which is the first thing they do, but they get the information based off of everyone who's died that all of them shared a room, cell, whatever you want to call it, when they were in quarantine, like as they were coming off the ship.
I did kind of like this little bit of world building where early on Sam mentions that the guy at the bar, I was kind of quarantine bunkmates with him before we all whatever, and later on when they've got the four, like, aliens who are either dead or whatever, they're like, hey, these guys don't have any connection, and then James Caan remembers the quarantine bunk bed thing and goes, hey, can you check where they were stationed when they were in quarantine? And that was it. Like, there were four cellmates, effectively. And I was like, that's a nice payoff.
Three of the names. They knew three of the names, and the fourth name was obviously the last person implicated in this whole thing, and it's Terence Stamp's character.
Yeah, hardcore.
So at that point, they realize, okay, the drug's definitely being made, blah, blah, blah. And then they go to the lab again that they went to the first time, And Sam he sees all of the equipment and he goes on a Tommy Wiseau level of destruction of just wrecking this place.
I do appreciate kind of the circumventing of like James Caan's introduced as the cop who plays outside the rules. He'll do anything to like get the bad guy. He'll be a bit rough. He'll shoot things that he's not meant to. He'll cause a bit of chaos. But when they go into this lab, he's the one saying to Sam, hey, we kind of need all this stuff for evidence. We can't just destroy it. Think about it. Play it by the book. Having him be the one who actually has to voice the reason for like procedure is quite an interesting turn.
He says all that. He says all of the like, yo, you know, can we just this one time, actually do things by the rules? And Sam, turning on the car, ready to drive off, just says, F the rules. And just, it's like, such a good character twist there.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they have the standoff, the shootout. A lot of the aliens die. We did kind of gloss over the scene at the nightclub where they go and speak to the woman who's actually dating the guy they killed at the beach. At least when they re-edited and rewrote it, like that's what they ended up saying anyway. So she's in this scene as well, just kind of there. But earlier on, she did a whole thing where she kind of like tries to cozy up to James Caan and basically tries to seduce him. And James Caan's very awkward and says no. And she's like, you're saying no, but your body's saying yes. And he's like, and basically he's just so uncomfortable that when they leave the building, he just turns to Sam and goes, from now on, you handle the woman.
Yeah. You're a married man. You're going to be able to handle that. Jesus Christ.
But yeah, they end up chasing the main bad guy who steals a cop car. And, you know, there's a bit of a car chase.
I mean, this whole sequence starts like just past the hour mark and it lasts up until the end of the movie. Like it's just a 20-minute long action scene.
Well, actually, I'm actually going to disagree with that in one sense, because this is where it feels like it ends and then they sort of do a fake out and then it's like, oh no, it's actually got another tacked on bit. So I will say it's split in two for that reason.
That's fair.
Because it's a car chase which leads them to like the docks or whatever, or a factory area. And Sam's a little bit injured at this point, so he just stays by the car, right? And James Caan's like, no, I've got this. I've got my silly over-the-top, like, you know, totally not...
Super gun.
Totally not, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Regulation?
No. When you're compensating, that's it. Totally not compensating for his little human penis that he's feeling ashamed of. And he
turns to Sam and he's like, notice, it fits in the holster. Just saying.
Then Sam pulls out a giant shotgun. Like, all right, shut up.
He does actually. At one point when he gets out of the car and he racks the shotgun. I remember that.
But yeah, he chases after Terence Stamp's character, who's got this giant vial of the drug from the case like on him. And there's a bit of a standoff, and he basically just says, no, I'm not going to die, I'm going to be immortal. And he holds the vial up and splits it in half, and it sort of just pours into his mouth, and it's just goo that's just all going in around his mouth and face. And then he seems to collapse in OD. And then it just cuts to like, oh, the cops are here now, and James Caan's like, oh, I did it, it's over. And I was like, James, do you not think you should have checked with Sam to see if like there was anything that maybe he was doing there by taking all this drug?
Well, we even do the half fake out where like he comes up to his body and starts like poking around at it. And then Terence Stamp's arm like flies up and grabs his neck and then goes limp again. And he's just like, oh, okay, guess he's definitely dead now. Like that's all he needed to try to figure out. And but yeah, no, when he's talking to the cops, then immediately he's like, oh yeah, I didn't even shoot him. He just OD'd. And then Sam turns around like, I'm sorry, he did what?
Yeah, it turns out they turn into like a Mr. Hyde when they take a lot of this substance. So it basically the last like 10 minutes are more of a monster movie where they're because they have like one uniformed cop who's driving the car slowly and they're walking down the street with their guns like, oh, we have to find them. If the people, if the human beings see what we could become, they're never going to let us be around. So they're going down the streets trying to find them. And yeah, honestly, like I don't think this is a bad idea conceptually. But it's so quickly rushed in here that it feels so tacked on, and I'm like, okay, I was not prepared for this change. I don't think this was like set up thematically all that well. And
well, yeah, I'm just gonna straight agree with you there, because what parallel does this have with racism? Like, what could this possibly be a parallel to in like reality? Like, there's nothing. It's not like, oh, did you know Hispanic people when they eat enough tacos they grow into like that? No, that's just. that's silly. That's stupid. And there's no parallel for this to say like, oh yeah, when aliens eat their alien goop, they turn into super strong powered aliens.
Yep, yeah, it's a whole thing, and it basically becomes mostly James Caan fighting the monster and running away from him because he's too strong. And he runs to the docks. He runs onto like a ship, which the bad guy jumps onto to chase after him. He's a big monster now. He's got like craggly bits, and he's like, "Arr!"
You say that, but I also feel like he is still very much a Star Trek, just rubber chest now.
Oh,
instead
sure,
of just rubber forehead. I kind of, when they said like, oh no, we undergo a metamorphosis, I wanted more. But I wanted there to actually be like a budget of like, you know,
that's
give
fair.
me Superman's Doomsday sort of thing going on here.
I'm just saying that the entire face now has a texture. There's like a sort of bumpy quality to it. There's definitely a change. I mean, it may not be as impressive as you want, but there's definitely a change.
Well, trivia-wise, it's a big enough change that Terence Stamp refused to sit in the chair for the extra hours it would require. So this isn't Terence Stamp anymore. This is someone else.
Yeah, it basically, from the main fishing boat they've jumped on, James Caan jumps down to the little lifeboat, and then he jumps down and he's like, hey, you dumb son of a bitch, we were on the ocean. We were on salt water. So he just sort of like dives at him and like throws both of themselves into the water. And yeah, he starts like melting or bubbling or whatever, and but he's still kind of grabbing on to like James Caan, so James Caan's struggling to like sort of stay up. So
they do a moment of it looks like everything's fine again.
Yes.
And then he jumps back up and says like, nope, I'm still here. And it's like, God damn, can't you just die already?
Yeah, we already did that fake out when he took the drug, so now we're doing it again in the water. So basically, at this point you've got Sam has commandeered the police helicopter that was called in, and he's reaching down. He asked the pilot to borrow his scarf, which I didn't know police like pilots typically would wear a scarf. It feels a bit far-fetched that he would be, but
this dude is just the most stylish cop.
But he grabs a scarf and wraps it around his hand to try and protect his hand, but he's willing to like sort of like dangle off the side of the helicopter leg and try and like lift up James Caan, which he ultimately does, even though it burns his hand. But that's the sacrifice he's willing to make to save his partner, because now they ride together, they die together. They're the bad boys of Alien Nation.
There you
go. And honestly, the whiplash of how quickly it cuts to a scene at the church where James Caan's decided to go to his daughter's wedding after all, and he's invited his partner and his family there, and they're both like in, you know, he's got a cast in his hand from the burns, James Caan's got a sling because he gets shot or whatever. And like, all right, let's go marry my daughter off, and credits roll.
And they have James Caan say something along the lines of like, "Hey Sam, if you're gonna stay my partner, I want to apologize to you for all the bad things I'll say to you." And Sam replies, "It's okay. You're only human."
I could have done without that line, to be honest.
Yeah, that was a bit much.
Yeah. So I think conceptually, it's a really solid movie. I think there's some good world building. I think the two leads have chemistry. It's just the actual like plot and investigation, which in a way it does actually make me think a lot of Blade Runner, where I like the ideas, I like the concepts, I like some of the actors, but the core investigation and plot and how it plays out is the thing that lets it down. I think that there's a bit of a comparison there for me between those two.
No, I can see that. I mean, I fully agree with that. I think I had the same complaints as you did with Blade Runner, where it just felt like the world was so interesting and there's so much to do in it. And ultimately, they ended up picking this kind of bland thing going on. Although I would actually say Alienation has the more interesting crime to me. Like, it actually has a more interesting investigation going on than whatever the hell was going on in Blade Runner.
Yeah, I mean... It's a hot take. I'm sure some people will be very upset at that statement.
I'll take it.
It's whatever. All right. What was your favorite scene of Alien Nation?
Oh, God. I think we kind of just skimmed past a little bit, but I've got one of two. I've got either the moment where they're drinking and they are talking about, or he's talking about how humanity is like giving them a chance and doing all this stuff. I think it does a great job of not only world building, but characterization at the same time. And then the other side of it is when James Caan is telling Sam, you know, we got to play by the rules. And he may as well have a pair of sunglasses that he flips down. It just says F the rules as he drives away. both of those do wonders for Sam's character. I think they're fantastic moments in their own right. I think I'm gonna give it to. I think I'm gonna give it to the car one when he says "F the rules" because it's a turning point for his character. I'm interested in it. The only thing I wish would have come out of it is that he like stuck to it more. Like he was instead when they hit the third act, like you said, yes, they had the whole bomb sequence scene, but ultimately it ends up being that he sits out most of the third act fight. So hit or miss there.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm actually picking the other one you brought up for the most part because I think it's probably the most poignant it gets, where he basically just says, humans have offered us all this, and yet it seems like we're also not welcome at the same time. And it's just such an interesting point that I think if anything, like if there's anything in that night of bonding while drinking that makes me think where James Caan finally turns a corner, it's probably that line, because I think his reactions even, yeah, I'm kind of a dick about this, aren't I? And like maybe that's like, you know, I should be aspiring to better. Human beings are very good at setting up what we think is the right thing to do and then avoiding doing it as much as humanly possible. So yeah, that's my pick. All right, MVP of the movie.
As I was watching this, I was kind of keeping a mental checklist in my head between the two leads, which one I thought was going to take it. I occasionally entertained the idea of Terence Stamp, but ultimately he was never a real contender for this one.
I like Terence Stamp, but I think his character in this is very undercooked. Like that, then that just goes along with the plot feeling very rushed. And maybe it's just because they cut out all of his scenes that were fleshing him out. But he's just the typical mustache twirling villain who wants to sell drugs. That's all he is.
He literally came to Earth and says, "Hey, I like this capitalism thing. Let's try that out."
Yep.
But I think, you know, with the mental checklist between the two, as much as I think that there are better moments throughout the movie for Sam, I think the better character as a whole and just the more enjoyable performance goes down to James Caan. I think that he really delivers something special here where he feels real to me. He feels like, okay, you have this world where aliens have existed for 3 years. He's still kind of in like an incredulous phase. He's still in kind of that like, I can't believe this is the world we live in. But he also feels like he does actually exist in it, where he is just coming to terms with certain things. Add on top of that, he is just enjoyable to be around and crack some good liners as well. I'm going to give it to him.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of a fight between the two leads, because a lot of the thoughtfulness comes from Sam's observations and the way he is. But I think James Caan obviously is a great actor, and he adds a lot of weight to this movie that I don't think it would otherwise have. I think this movie, even with the world building being where it is, I think if you didn't have the actors in these two roles, and this goes for Mandy Patinkin as well, I think the thing would be like I think it's just okay overall because of all the problems it has. I think if you didn't have these two actors, I think I would be much more like under that midway line, without those two. I'm going to go with Caan as well, but it is kind of a two-person show, and it kind of needs both of them. But I will give it to him.
Yeah.
Barring that final bit of narration where it feels like he's literally walking out of the recording booth as he's saying the last line. Very strange. All right, what are you rating Alien Nation out of 10?
I mean, I think that I am very positive on this one, probably just out of enjoyment with like the lines and how like certain things went, but ultimately there is a pacing problem to it, so I don't think I could put it into great territory. I think that the basis for it, the way that the world was constructed, is strong enough that, like I said, I have an interest in checking out the other related media. I don't know if the TV show would be something I would be interested in, because this does feel like the sort of thing where you want there to be a arc, you want there to be a like a storyline they're following, and like a sitcom style TV show or whatever's going on there. I don't know if I'd be into that.
I mean, I don't know if it's a sitcom, but
right, but just something that like came out weekly. Maybe it is like a, you know, CSI NYPD sort of thing, and I would be into that, but I'm at least interested in the world enough to check that out, so it must have been doing something right. So overall, I think I'm going to come down with this one as a 7.5. I think that it is shy of the 8. It doesn't quite get there, but I still consider this to be a very good movie, and it's played a lot of its cards right, even if it just was lacking in a few very important areas.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm definitely not going as high as that. I
Right.
think the story and the pacing, some of which might come from it just being edited to shit because they wanted to shorten it down to 90 minutes. And whether that's because they just wanted a shorter movie and they were forced to, or because maybe it was kind of a mess anyway, and this at least made it more of a palpable mess because it's a bit trimmed down and streamlined. I don't know.
Right.
But regardless, like whatever effect that's had between the script and the editing, I do find the actual story less interesting, even though the characters and the world building and all that stuff is pretty good. So for me, it's a bit more lukewarm. I'm going to go with a 6. I think that the characters are solid, world building solid, ideas solid, but the progression, the third act, how all that stuff plays out, like, because that's the thing, it's not just the interviews at the start that I think are repetitive, it's also the third act's kind of underwhelming and feels like it's got this tacked on section that feels out of nowhere. So yeah, there's just too many things, there's too many kinks in the armor as it's going on for me to go any higher than the 6, I think. But
Okay.
I didn't hate watching it. I doubt I'll ever watch it again though at this point. I don't think it's got repeat value for me.
That's what I like. I might consider rewatching it if there were a director's cut, if there were something to expand this plot and make it something a bit more coherent. But yeah, I think on its own, it's not something that I would have an interest coming back to, at least for several years.
Yeah. So in a minute, David will do his homework movie, but so stick around for that as a little bonus segment. But I will tell you that you can get bonus content from us if you want to support the Atomic Cinema Experiment and also the other shows we do, like the Collector's Cut. It's the other movie podcast that me and David do, and there's also Screams After Midnight that I do with Tim, the horror movie podcast. You can get bonus content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. But if you want the audio versions, that's definitely on Patreon. But you get bonus episodes of Screams After Midnight, but specifically for me and David, you get 2 bonus shows every month. You get the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and we do Extra Reels, which is where we review some of the worst things ever made. And sometimes those will be sci-fi movies, actually. If something's like sci-fi, but that low in the sort of quality threshold, I'll still put it on Extra Reels, just because we don't have time to waste an episode of this show on it. So
I'm sorry, did we not do Atlas on this show?
It's a little bit different though when it's a brand new, like, contemporary movie, right?
Okay.
Like, that's one that I would argue, yes, does feel like it could be on Extra Reels, but we couldn't no go in knowing that for sure.
I think we could have made a very strong guess there, Peter, but
look, sometimes they'll still be worth doing for the public show, but sometimes they're the extra special. You want to see us be tortured and be miserable, you get that on Extra Reels. So that's patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or if you'd rather, YouTube membership on the YouTube channel, MailFuzz Movies.
yes.
So, all right, that obviously, like, subscribe, comment down below,
Yes.
all that stuff. All right, so
And nothing coming out next week. Gap week.
oh yeah, I need to tell people that, don't I? Wait, is that true? Oh, that's true.
Yep.
Yes. Nothing out next week. It's the week off. We did, I think, 6 or 7 in a row, and then a week off. That tends to be the format, more or less. But I will tell you what's coming when we come back. The week after, we will have another 2020s sci-fi movie, a film called The Beast, starring Leah Seydoux, which I know very little about. So it's kind of a complete, it could be great, could be terrible. I have no idea. We'll find out. Yeah. So that's coming in 2 weeks' time from today. Look forward to that. Worth mentioning, though, I'll just sort of plug this a bit as well, is that we're into October, so there is a lot. I mentioned Screams After Midnight. We do a lot of extra episodes of that in October for the October-thon. There's like 3 or 4 of them a week right now, so if you like horror movies, there's plenty of me and Tim talking about horror movies this month to tide you over for the 1 week that Ace isn't going to be on. Yes. Plus, we're doing erotic 90s thrillers on Collector's Cut. So, anyway.
It's just normal 90s thrillers, but we're being very erotic about it.
I don't even know what that means. All right. The homework movie. David goes back every week and watches a movie that was on the show before he joined the show, so he could eventually be completely caught up in everything when it comes to doing countdowns and whatnot. So, David, what was this week's homework movie?
Well, this week's homework movie was just a random one. I had to get some 80s movies done, and I've run out of ways to relate them. So we got a nice little buddy cop movie about some aliens. I decided to go with H.P. Lovecraft's From Beyond.
Okay.
absolutely no relation.
They don't need to be. Like, I think sometimes you worry too much about this, like relating them to the movie thing.
Look, I started off trying to relate them as best I could because I thought, you know, theming, it makes sense. But when I have to watch as many 80s ones as possible before the end of the year just to get that ready for a countdown, I'm gonna eventually run out. But I'll get back to mild theming later on. Anyway,
so
this movie.
Over in Collector's Cut, we're doing 90s erotic thrillers right now. David watched the very erotic H.P. Lovecraft movie.
So erotic. Yeah. Here's the thing. I thought I had never seen this movie before, and to an extent I was correct, but you definitely had this on stream at some point.
Oh,
and
okay.
I definitely at least partially watched along because there was a lot of things I was like, this seems very familiar, and there's no way that this is ever appearing in anything else. So yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, it's basically just a guy makes a machine that allows them to see like an extra dimension, and it's full of monsters. And then one of the scientist guys who already has some messed up stuff about him gets corrupted and killed and turned into this horrific monster. And they're basically just trying to figure out how to shut down the machine for the whole movie because it keeps on affecting them in different ways. I think it was very creepy. I think it was very well done in terms of like cinematography and stuff like that. But obviously it all really comes down to the practical effects of how many creepy little phallic tentacles can we throw into a movie before you get uncomfortable? The answer, they blew past it in the first 5 minutes. I think that it is, as much as we were talking in this movie about there being kind of a little tacked on bit at the end, I kind of got that same vibe from this one, where it felt like they tied it back in. They did a whole thing, but like there was a little bit right before the third act where they go to a hospital, and I won't spoil too much of what happens there, but ultimately it felt very separate from the rest of the movie that had been built up to that point. And then by the time the third act hits, it kind of felt like we could have skipped over that whole segment. And it accounts for a good like 20 minutes of the movie. So I got to mark it down a little bit there, but ultimately this movie lives or dies by how creepy the practical effects are, and it does great. I think it does a fantastic job of really nailing that weirdness factor and making it a just deeply unsettling movie from beginning to end. So if I have to slap a rating on it, I think I'm probably going to come down... I'll probably come down on like a 7. I think it's definitely better than any sort of 6, but ultimately I was having just a little bit of trouble engaging in the last half of the movie. And by the time it wrapped up, I kind of felt like it should have already reached that point about an hour earlier. So, yeah, 7.
Yeah, I love how I set you up to talk about erotic stuff, and you didn't even mention the erotic stuff in the movie.
They activate the pineal gland, which apparently makes you horny all the damn time.
Yes.
And dear Lord, do they lean into it.
Yes. There's a lot of dominatrix outfit stuff going on at one point in the movie.
Yeah, there's a character who specifically says, like, all right, so this machine lets you see into another dimension. Okay, can anyone explain to me why I had a hard-on the whole time?
That's such a great line of dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Beyond's a fun movie. It's not as good as Reanimator, which is the same kind of, like, people behind it, for the most part. But it's got a lot of great practical effects. That's good. 7... I don't know what I gave it. Probably a 7 or 7.5 sounds like something I'd have given it.
Yeah, 7.5. Yeah,
that sounds right. Just not quite great. Just it's not quite there into great territory, but pretty good. And I've seen it a couple times now. It's definitely a fun time, and it's memorable. There's a lot of memorable things in it.
Very good. Trust me, when I go to sleep tonight, one of these 2 movies that I watched today are going to stick in my mind a lot more, and it ain't Alien Nation.
All right, there you go. That's the show, everyone. That's been the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Thank you very much for joining us. Just remind you again, next week is the off week. Week after, we'll be back with The Beast from 2023, I think. Maybe 2022. But anyway, recent movie. So thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.